The observation deck of Eden 4 offered the most magnificent view in all of humanity's remaining sanctuaries. 17-year-old Kalen Voss stood with his forehead pressed against the reinforced glass, gazing at the vastness of space where distant stars appeared as nothing more than pinpricks of light against the infinite darkness. Each one represented a world, a system, possibly an entire civilization, or what remained of one. "Ah, they say it's awake again," a voice said behind him. Kalen didn't turn. He recognized Commander Thorne's voice, the gruff military leader who had overseen Eden 4's security since before Kalen was born. The old soldier had a way of delivering apocalyptic news with the same tone one might use to discuss the recycling schedule. "Zarakon!" Kalen whispered the name like a forbidden word. "Is it true?" The council confirmed it an hour ago. They're still debating whether to tell the general population. Commander Thorne moved to stand beside him, his weathered face reflecting in the glass. "I thought you should know first." Kalen's fingers unconsciously traced the small silver implant behind his ear, the mark of his genetic modification, the emotional adaptation sequence that made him unique among humanity's survivors, the first child born with the ability to process and project emotions beyond the normal human spectrum, a living experiment. "Why tell me?" Kalen asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Because in 3 days, they're sending you to meet it." The words hung in the recycled air of Eden 4, the last major space station built by humanity after the Silent Era, the century of isolation following the multi-species war that had nearly wiped out Earth and its colonies, a war that had ended not with victory, but with humanity's retreat into the shadows of the galaxy, hoping to be forgotten. And now Zarakon, the entity known as the Hunter of all civilizations, had awakened once more. Kalen closed his eyes, feeling the weight of billions of lives suddenly pressing down on his shoulders. "I was never meant to be a messenger," he said quietly. "I was just supposed to be proof that we could change." Commander Thorne's reflection showed no emotion, but his voice softened slightly. "Sometimes being proof is the most important message of all." The council chamber was a perfect circle, designed to eliminate hierarchical positioning, a symbolic gesture that did little to mask the power dynamics at play. 12 representatives from Earth's remaining territories sat in uncomfortable silence as Kalen entered, the youngest by decades. He felt their eyes tracking his every movement. High Counselor Vega, a woman whose age was betrayed only by the silver streaks in her dark hair, gestured to the empty seat at the center of the room. "Kalen Voss," she announced formally, humanity's biological envoy. He sat, back straight, face carefully composed. His training in emotional regulation had been rigorous, a necessity for someone whose DNA had been modified to experience and project emotions with heightened sensitivity. "I haven't agreed to anything," he reminded them. "The decision was made when you were conceived," Counselor Maddox said coldly from Kalen's right. "Your entire genetic sequence was designed for this contingency. A contingency no one thought would ever be needed." Kalen countered. "Zarakon was supposed to be dormant for another 1,000 years. Counselor Vega's expression remained neutral. "Our calculations were wrong. The devastation of the Proxima system last month wasn't a supernova as initially reported. It was Zarakon, feeding, growing, and now it's moving." A holographic display activated in the center of the chamber, showing star systems in red, yellow, and green. The red ones, too many, formed a trail leading ominously toward the quadrant where Earth and its few remaining outposts hid. "If the entity maintains its current trajectory and consumption rate," continued Vega, "it will discover Earth within 6 months." "And you want me to do what exactly?" Ask it nicely to go another direction? Kalen couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "We want you to make contact," said a new voice. A woman stepped forward from the shadows behind the council seats. Tall, with eyes that seemed to have witnessed centuries, she carried herself with a diplomat's poise but a soldier's awareness. "I'm Anya Dre." Kalen stiffened. Everyone knew that name, the diplomat who had surrendered to the Alliance forces a century ago, ending the multi-species war at the cost of humanity's galactic standing. Some called her a savior, others a traitor. "The surrender diplomat," he said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. She didn't flinch. "I prefer the one who stopped the extinction. You and I are not so different in our purpose. Kalen Voss." "Enya will lead the contact mission," Counselor Vega explained, "along with 2 others who bring essential skills." On cue, 2 more figures entered the chamber. The first was clearly not human, a Gyare V-12 military-grade synthetic, its metal frame showing signs of significant age and repair. These robots had been decommissioned after the war, their advanced tactical systems deemed too dangerous. This one's optical sensors glowed a soft blue rather than the standard red, suggesting extensive modifications. Behind the synthetic came a man who seemed carved from stone itself, muscular and heavily scarred, with eyes that evaluated every potential threat in the room. His right arm was a military-grade prosthetic, and the insignia tattooed on his neck marked him as a reclaimed warrior, a soldier genetically enhanced during the war, then rehabilitated for peacetime. "This is GRA V-12, Enya introduced the synthetic, one of the few remaining tactical units with first-hand combat data from the pre-silent era. "And this is Darren Holt, former Bioshock Division." Holt's eyes narrowed at Kalen. "This is the contact specialist? A teenager?" "This teenager is the only human alive with the neurological capacity to communicate with Zeracon using non-linguistic pathways." Enya replied smoothly. His emotional adaptation sequencing allows him to both receive and transmit emotional states that would overwhelm or be undetectable to standard human physiology. "So our fate rests on sending feelings to a cosmic predator." Holt's laugh was harsh. "We should be preparing evacuation protocols or weapon systems, not diplomatic missions. Weapons failed the last 14 civilizations that encountered Zeracon," Gray V-12 stated, its synthesized voice surprisingly gentle for a war machine. "My historical databanks contain partial records of 7 such encounters. Probability of military success, effectively 0. Kalen looked around the room, at the faces of the council members who avoided his gaze, at Enya's careful composure, at Holt's barely contained aggression, at the synthetic's impassive metal features. "When do we leave?" he asked quietly. "Tomorrow," Counselor Vega answered. "The perihelion is being prepared as we speak." Kalen nodded, feeling the weight of humanity's future settling onto his shoulders, a burden he had been literally born to carry. The perihelion was small for an interstellar vessel, optimized for speed and stealth rather than comfort or firepower. As Kalen boarded, he carried only a single bag containing personal items, a luxury not afforded to most of humanity after the resource shortages of the silent era. In the ship's compact common area, he found Enya reviewing navigation charts with Gyare V-12, while Holt methodically checked and rechecked a series of compact devices that Kalen recognized as emergency beacons. "Our route takes us through the ash belt," Enya explained without looking up. "The remains of civilizations Zeracon has already consumed. The radiation and debris fields will mask our approach until we reach the neural nexus, the location where communication might be possible." "Might be?" Kalen asked. No one has ever returned from direct contact with Zeracon to confirm the theoretical models. G-Ray V12 stated, "My databanks contain only observational data collected from safe distances." Holt snorted. Translation: "We're flying into the mouth of the beast with nothing but theories and a genetic experiment as our shield." Kalen ignored the jab. "What exactly happens when we reach this neural nexus?" Enya finally looked up, her eyes meeting his. "According to the fragmented records we've gathered from various sources, Zeracon isn't a physical entity in the conventional sense. It's a hyper-evolved biological consciousness that exists across multiple dimensions. The neural nexus is a point in space-time where its consciousness intersects most strongly with our reality." "And I'm supposed to... what? Think at it really hard. Your enhanced emotional capacity should allow you to establish a connection that transcends linguistic barriers," she explained. "Zeracon doesn't understand language. It perceives intention, emotion, and biological imperatives. In essence, you'll be having a conversation through pure feeling. A conversation with something that eats stars and civilizations for breakfast." Holt muttered. What could possibly go wrong? The ship's engines hummed to life, and Kalen felt the subtle shift as the perihelion disengaged from Eden 4's docking bay. Through the viewport, he watched his home, the only world he had ever known, shrink to a tiny point of light, then disappear entirely as they accelerated beyond visual range. "Navigation protocols engaged," G-Ray V12 announced. "Estimated arrival at the Ash Belt perimeter, 47 hours. Kalen retreated to his assigned quarters, a space barely larger than a closet, and sat cross-legged on the narrow bed. Closing his eyes, he began the meditation exercises that had been part of his daily routine since childhood, designed to help him navigate and control his enhanced emotional spectrum. But for the first time in years, he couldn't find the calm center his instructors had taught him to seek. Instead, his mind kept returning to a single, terrifying thought. What if humanity wasn't worth saving? It was a question he had never dared voice aloud. The history of Earth was filled with violence, exploitation, and self-destruction. The multi-species war had only been the latest and largest expression of humanity's capacity for devastation. What right did they have to plead for mercy from a cosmic judge? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. When he opened the door, Enya stood in the corridor. Her tall frame slightly stooped to avoid hitting the low ceiling. "May I come in?" she asked. Kalen stepped aside, allowing her to enter the tiny space. She sat on the only chair, leaving him to perch on the edge of the bed. "You're afraid," she stated simply. "Wouldn't you be?" "I am," she admitted, "but not of Zeracon." This surprised him. "What then?" "Of failing. Again." Her composed facade cracked slightly, revealing centuries of pain beneath. "When I surrendered to the Alliance, I did so believing it was the only way to ensure humanity's survival. What I didn't know was the price we would pay in isolation. The silent era." She nodded. 100 years of quarantine, 100 years for the rest of the galaxy to forget we existed, 100 years for us to forget who we were. Her eyes, ancient and tired, fixed on him. "You were created to help us remember." "I'm not a symbol," Kalen said, the words coming out more harshly than he intended. "I'm just a person." "No, Kalen Voss. You are both." She stood, moving toward the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we enter the graveyard of civilizations far greater than our own." The ash belt defied description. From a distance, it resembled an ordinary asteroid field, fragments of rock and ice drifting in the void between stars. But as the perihelion ventured deeper, The true nature of the debris became horrifyingly clear. Those aren't asteroids, Holt said, staring at the sensor readings. They're ruins. Through the viewports, Kalen could see massive structures floating in the emptiness, the broken remains of space stations, fragments of enormous ships, and stranger artifacts that defied easy categorization. Some emitted faint energy signatures even after what must have been centuries of abandonment. Gray V-12, can you identify any of these civilizations? Enya asked. The synthetic tilted its head. Optical sensors scanning. Partial match for Zendi architecture in Sector 4. Probable Thalassian defense platform at coordinates 227.93. Numerous unidentified constructs of apparent artificial origin. All gone now, Holt said quietly. Eaten by the same monster we're flying toward. Kalen moved closer to the viewport, placing his palm against the cool transparisteel. Something about the desolation called to him, resonating with the modified emotional centers of his brain. He felt an echo of terror, of desperate last stands and futile pleas for mercy. They tried to fight, he whispered. Yes, Gray V-12 confirmed. Radiation patterns suggest massive energy weapon discharges, consistent with planetary defense systems and capital ship armaments. Fat lot of good it did them. Holt said. A sudden alarm blared through the ship, causing everyone to tense. GRA V-12 moved to the navigation console with surprising grace for a machine of its size and age. Anomalous energy readings detected ahead. It reported, consistent with active technology rather than residual emissions. Survivors? Kalen asked, hope flaring briefly. Unlikely, Enya said, moving to examine the readings. The ash belt is at least 3 centuries old. No known species could survive here that long without external support. Whatever it is, it's directly in our path. Holt pointed out. We either go around or through. Going around would add significant time to our journey. Gray V-12 calculated, and increase our exposure profile to potential detection. Enya's decision was immediate. We proceed as planned, but remain at alert status. Holt, prepare defense countermeasures, just in case. The perihelion continued forward, slowing as they approached the source of the energy readings. Eventually, they came within visual range of what appeared to be an intact space station, a massive ring structure with spoke-like appendages extending from its central hub. Thalassian design, Gray V-12 identified, likely a scientific outpost based on configuration. How is it still powered after all this time? Kalen asked. Thalassian quantum cores were theoretically self-sustaining. Enya explained. They drew energy from dimensional fluctuations. Some were designed to operate for millennia without maintenance. Are we seriously considering docking with that thing? Holt asked incredulously. It could contain valuable information about Zeracon. Enya pointed out. Perhaps even records of previous contact attempts. Or it could be a trap, Holt countered, or contaminated, or structurally unsound. Pick your method of death. After a moment of consideration, Enya turned to Kalen. You're the mission objective. This decision affects you most directly. What do you think we should do? Kalen was surprised by the deference. No one had ever asked for his opinion on mission parameters before. He closed his eyes, reaching out with his enhanced senses, trying to feel anything from the derelict station. There's something there, he said, slowly. Not life, exactly, but purpose, waiting. He opened his eyes. We should investigate. Enya nodded. Gray V-12, begin docking procedures. Holt, prepare an exploration team. You and I will go first. Kalen remains on the ship until we confirm it's safe. And if it's not safe? Holt asked. Then you get back to the ship, and we leave. She said, simply. The mission to contact Zeracon takes priority over archaeological curiosity. The docking process was tense but uneventful. The Thalassian station's automated systems seemed to recognize the perihelion as a compatible vessel, extending docking clamps and establishing an atmospheric seal without prompting. Environmental readings show breathable atmosphere, Gray V12 reported, sounding almost surprised. Temperature is within human tolerance range, no detected biological contaminants. Too perfect, Holt muttered, checking the power cell on his sidearm. Nothing survives centuries without degradation. Unless it was designed to wait, Enya said, securing her environment suit but leaving the helmet unsealed for now. The Thalassians were known for their long-term thinking. They built structures meant to last for ages. Fat lot of good it did them against Zeracon. Holt replied. The airlock cycled, and Enya and Holt stepped onto the Thalassian station. G-Ray V12 remained at the ship's controls while Kalen watched through the surveillance feed. Feeling strangely drawn to the ancient structure, the station's interior was illuminated by soft blue lighting that activated as they moved forward. The architecture was both alien and hauntingly beautiful. Organic curves blended with precise geometric patterns in a way that seemed to defy conventional engineering. Central hub should be ahead. Enya's voice came through the comm. If there are any functional data systems, they'll be there. Kalen watched as they made their way deeper into the station, past empty laboratories and living quarters that had been abandoned in apparent haste. Personal effects still lay scattered about, the equivalent of coffee cups left on desks and family photos never retrieved. They knew they were going to die, he whispered, somehow certain of this fact. Affirmative. Gray V12 agreed beside him. The absence of skeletal remains suggests organized evacuation, but the presence of personal effects indicates it was rushed and prioritized only living tissue transport. You mean they took the bodies but left everything else? Correct. Thalassian burial customs emphasize the return of biological material to their ancestral oceans. Even in catastrophe, they would prioritize this cultural imperative. The feed showed Enya and Holt reaching the central hub, a vast spherical chamber dominated by what appeared to be a three-dimensional star map. As they entered, the entire room illuminated, and the star map activated, showing thousands of points of light. It's the historical record, Enya breathed, her voice filled with wonder. Each light represents a civilization that existed when this map was created. Holt moved closer to the display. And the dark areas. Based on the timestamp indicators, those are regions where Zeracon had already fed, Enya replied. Studying the controls, this station was specifically monitoring its path. As they watched, the map began to animate, showing the progression of darkness across the galaxy, civilizations blinking out one after another as Zeracon moved through space and time. Wait, Holt said suddenly. Replay that last sequence. Enya manipulated the controls, and the animation reversed slightly, then played forward again. There, Holt pointed. That star went dark, but then lit up again. Boss. That's impossible, Enya murmured. Nothing survives Zeracon. They zoomed in on the anomalous star system, and a data stream appeared beside it in the Thalassian script. Can you read it? Holt asked. Partially, Enya replied, concentrating. My xenolinguistics is rusty, but it appears to be describing an encounter between Zeracon and a species called the Meridians. What happened? They communicated with it somehow, established a connection that made Zeracon pause. She looked up from the display. her expression stunned. They survived initial contact. How? Holt demanded. It doesn't say. The record ends there. Enya continued scanning the data. But there's a reference to something called the empathy protocol. Back on the perihelion, Kalen felt a sudden jolt, as if someone had called his name. The empathy protocol, he repeated. GRAV-12, does that term appear in your historical databanks? The synthetic's optical sensors flickered as it searched its memory. Negative, no direct reference. However, there is a theoretical framework from the late pre-silent era regarding non-linguistic communication with hyper-evolved entities. It proposed that emotional resonance might bridge gaps that language cannot. That's what I was designed for, Kalen realized. Not just to communicate with Zeracon, but to replicate whatever the Meridians did. On the feed, Enya was downloading the Thalosian data to a portable device. We need to get this back to the ship, if there's anything here that can help with our contact mission. A sudden tremor shook the station, cutting her off. Warning lights began flashing throughout the central hub. What was that? Holt asked, drawing his weapon instinctively. The station's quantum core is destabilizing, Enya reported, reading the flashing Thalosian warnings. It might have been stable for centuries, but our presence has triggered some kind of security protocol. In other words, this place is about to blow. Holt translated. We need to move, now. They rushed back toward the airlock, the tremors increasing in frequency and intensity. Kalen and GRAV-12 prepared the ship for immediate departure. Docking clamps disengaged, GRAV-12 reported as soon as Enya and Holt were safely aboard. Initiating emergency departure sequence. The perihelion pulled away from the Thalosian station just as the first major explosion tore through its central hub. They watched from a safe distance as the ancient structure broke apart. Centuries of waiting finally at an end. Did you get the data? Kalen asked as Enya entered the bridge, still catching her breath. She held up the storage device. Everything in their database about Zeracon and the empathy protocol. It might be our only advantage. If you can call it that, Holt said, following behind her. From what I saw, the Meridians only delayed the inevitable. Zeracon still consumed their world eventually. Damn, but they bought time, Enya insisted, and perhaps learned something in the process that we can use. Kalen took the data device, feeling its weight, both physical and metaphorical, in his palm. How long until we reach the neural nexus? Approximately 22 hours at current velocity. GRAV-12 answered. Then we have 22 hours to figure out how to make a predator pause before it swallows us whole, Kalen said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. As the perihelion continued its journey through the ash belt, Kalen immersed himself in the Thalosian data. Enya worked tirelessly to translate the alien script, while GRAV-12 assisted by cross-referencing the information with its historical archives. Even Holt contributed, his military experience providing insight into the strategic implications of Zeracon's movement patterns. The Meridians, they discovered, had been a highly empathic species with a collective consciousness similar to Earth's extinct coral reefs. Their entire civilization had evolved around principles of emotional connection and shared experience. When faced with Zeracon, they had somehow projected their collective emotional state in a way that temporarily confused the cosmic predator. The Meridians literally thought as one, Enya explained during their final briefing. Their emotional output was unified and amplified naturally. Kalen's genetic modifications were designed to replicate this ability, but with individual human consciousness. So I'm supposed to feel really hard at a space monster and hope it gets confused enough to leave us alone? Kalen asked, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. Not exactly, Enya replied, bringing up a schematic on the main display. The Thalassian data included specifications for a device they were developing, an emotion amplifier designed to enhance non-linguistic communication. GRAV-12 has been adapting it to interface with your neural implant. The synthetic held up a small, delicate device that resembled a silver circlet. This will increase your emotional projection capability by approximately 400%. It may also enhance your receptive capacity, allowing you to better perceive Zarakon's responses. If it has any, Holt muttered. Every living thing communicates in some way. Enya countered. Even plants respond to stimuli. Zarakon may be alien beyond our comprehension, but it is alive, and therefore must have some way of processing information about its environment. And what exactly am I supposed to communicate? Kalen asked, the question that had been haunting him since they left Eden 4. What message could possibly convince a cosmic predator not to feed? A heavy silence fell over the room. It was Gray V12 who finally answered, its synthesized voice surprisingly gentle. Based on my analysis of successful interspecies negotiations throughout history, the most effective approach would be to demonstrate value in continued existence, not just for humans, but for Zarakon itself. We need to make the case that we're worth more alive than dead. Enya translated. And are we? Kalen asked quietly. After everything humanity has done, the wars, the environmental destruction, the near extinction of countless species, including our own, can we honestly claim we deserve to continue? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and raw. Holt looked away, his scarred face tightening. Enya's diplomatic mask slipped for just a moment, revealing centuries of doubt beneath. It was GRAV-12 who broke the silence again. I have observed humans for 247 years. Through war and peace, I have seen cruelty beyond calculation and kindness without logical benefit. My conclusion is that humanity's value lies not in what it has been, but in what it may yet become. The synthetic's optical sensors fixed on Kalen. You are evidence of that potential. The first of a new generation, designed not for conquest, but for connection. That's a pretty speech from a war machine, Holt said, but there was less bite in his voice than usual. I was designed for war, GRAV-12 acknowledged, but I chose peace when given the opportunity. That choice is what separates mere existence from living. The ship's proximity alert suddenly blared, cutting off further philosophical discussion. We are approaching the neural nexus, GRAV-12 announced. Estimated arrival in 17 minutes. Kalen felt his heart rate accelerate, the implant behind his ear warming slightly as his emotional state intensified. Enya moved to his side, placing the circlet in his hands. You don't have to convince Zarakon that all of humanity deserves to live, she said softly. You just have to make it question whether we deserve to die. 17 minutes later. The perihelion entered a region of space unlike anything Kalen had ever seen or imagined. The emptiness between stars seemed to fold and ripple, as if reality itself was merely a thin fabric stretched over something much vaster and more complex. Colors that had no names in human language flowed across the viewports, and the ship's sensors reported contradictory readings that made no physical sense. Spatial and temporal anomalies detected on all vectors. GRAV-12 reported, its voice showing the first hint of strain Kalen had heard from the synthetic. Navigation systems compromised. Can we maintain position? Enya asked, gripping the console as the ship shuddered. Negative. We are being drawn inward along currents of uncertain composition. Holt checked the weapon systems. Shields at 62% and falling. Whatever this place is, it's eating through our defenses without even trying. Kalen stood at the center of the bridge. The circlet, now secured around his head and connected to the implant behind his ear. He could feel something pressing against his consciousness, vast and alien, and hungry in a way that transcended physical appetite. "It knows we're here," he whispered. The others turned to him, their faces showing varying degrees of fear and determination. "Can you sense it clearly?" Enya asked. Kalen nodded slowly. "It's everywhere, not just around us, but through us, like we're cells in its body." "That matches the Thalosian theoretical models," GRAV-12 confirmed. "Zeracon exists partially in higher dimensions, intersecting with our reality, rather than being fully contained within it." "So how do we communicate with something that sees us the way we see bacteria?" Holt demanded. "We don't," Kalen said, surprising himself with the sudden clarity. "It needs to see me specifically, face to face, or whatever passes for that with Zeracon." "Absolutely not," Enya objected immediately. "The amplifier should work from within the ship's shielding." "It won't be enough," Kalen insisted, suddenly certain. The Meridians were a unified consciousness spanning an entire ecosystem. "I'm just one modified human. I need to get closer." "Closer to what?" Holt gestured at the swirling chaos outside the viewports. "There's nothing out there but death." "There's a focal point," Kalen said, pointing toward a region where the reality distortions seemed to converge. "That's where Zeracon's consciousness is strongest in our dimension. That's where I need to be." "You can't survive in that environment without protection," Enya argued. "The radiation alone would kill you in seconds." Gray V-12 moved to a storage compartment and retrieved what appeared to be an ancient spacesuit, heavily modified with technology that looked far more advanced than its basic frame. This was designed for special operations in hazardous environments during the multi-species war. The synthetic explained, "It contains experimental shielding against both conventional and quantum-level threats. It may provide sufficient protection for approximately 8.7 minutes. "That's not enough time," Enya protested. "It will have to be," Kalen said, already moving to don the suit. "If I don't try, we all die anyway, along with everyone back on Earth." No one could argue with that brutal logic. Holt helped Kalen secure the ancient suit while Enya adjusted the circlet to work through the helmet's systems. GRAV-12 calculated the optimal approach vector to the focal point, programming it into the suit's maneuvering thrusters. The external temperature at the focal point exceeds 7,000 Kelvin. The synthetic warned, "The suit's cooling systems will fail after approximately 428 seconds. You must complete contact and return before that time." Kalen nodded, the weight of the mission, of all humanity, pressing down on him more heavily than the bulky suit. "If I don't make it back—" "Save the goodbye speech," Holt interrupted gruffly. "Just do what you were born to do, kid." Enya's eyes met his through the helmet visor. "Remember what we discussed. You don't need to convince it we deserve to live. Just make it question whether we deserve to die." With those final words of advice, Kalen entered the airlock. The outer door opened, and he was thrust into the maelstrom of the neural nexus. Propelled by the suit's thrusters toward the point where dimensions intersected and the greatest predator the galaxy had ever known waited. The experience defied description. Kalen felt simultaneously expanded and compressed, as if his consciousness was being stretched across light years, while his physical form contracted to subatomic dimensions. Colors beyond the visible spectrum assaulted his senses, and sounds that had no source reverberated through his bones. Through it all, he maintained focus on the focal point, a singularity of sorts where the chaos of the nexus seemed to organize itself around a central purpose. As he approached, the alien presence he had sensed earlier grew stronger. more defined. Hunger. That was the overwhelming sensation. Not a physical hunger, but an existential one. A drive to consume not for sustenance, but for completion, as if the universe itself contained a hole that could never be filled. Kalen activated the circlet, feeling the familiar tingle as it amplified his emotional state. He projected a simple query, not in words, but in pure feeling. We exist. Why do you need to end that existence? The response was immediate and overwhelming, a tidal wave of alien consciousness crashing against his mind. Kalen gasped as images and sensations flooded his awareness. Countless civilizations rising and falling, species evolving and extinguishing, stars being born and dying, all in an endless cycle of cosmic indifference. Existence is temporary. Consumption is purpose. The concept wasn't conveyed in language, but Kalen understood it nonetheless. Zarokon didn't see itself as evil or destructive. It was simply fulfilling its function in the cosmic order, the way a wolf doesn't consider the moral implications of hunting deer. Kalen pushed back with another emotional projection. We are not like the others you have consumed. We can change, adapt, become more than what we are. The alien consciousness seemed to pause, considering. Then came another flood of images, humanity's own history, seen from an outside perspective. Wars, environmental destruction, cruelty, and exploitation. The message was clear. Zarokon had observed Earth from afar and found humans wanting. Your pattern is known, predictable, unworthy of continuation. Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the failing temperature controls in his suit. Zarokon wasn't just a mindless predator. It was a judge, evaluating civilizations and finding most of them undeserving of existence. How could he argue against that judgment when part of him had wondered the same thing? What right did humanity have to continue after all the harm it had caused? The suit's warning systems blared in his ears. Core temperature critical. Structural integrity compromised. Return to vessel immediately. But Kalen couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without finding some way to make Zarokon understand. In desperation, he opened himself completely, dropping all barriers and projecting not arguments or pleas, but his own life experience. The loneliness of being the first of his kind, the weight of being a symbol rather than a person, the doubt about humanity's worthiness, the hope that they could be better, the fear that they never would, the wonder of standing at Eden 4's observation deck, seeing the stars and dreaming of what might be. And beneath it all, the most human emotion of all, the stubborn, irrational refusal to accept inevitability, the insistence that even in the face of cosmic indifference, existence itself had meaning. For a moment, just a moment, Kalen felt something new from Zarokon, not understanding exactly, but hesitation, confusion, as if it had encountered a pattern it couldn't immediately categorize. Your emotional structure is anomalous, contradictory, non-optimal. It was working. Somehow, the very messiness of human emotion, the contradictions and illogical attachments, was something Zarokon couldn't easily process. Kalen pushed harder, projecting not just his own feelings, but the collective emotional history of humanity, the grief of loss and the joy of connection, the despair of failure and the triumph of perseverance, the cruelty of hatred and the transcendence of love. We are imperfect, he acknowledged, but our imperfection is our strength. It drives us to become more than we are. The suit's systems were failing catastrophically now. Pain lanced through Kalen as radiation penetrated the weakening shields. He had seconds, not minutes, before his body would begin to break down at the molecular level. With his last coherent thought, He projected a final, desperate message, not an argument, but a simple truth. If you consume us, you will never know what we might have become. The response came not in thoughts or images, but in a fundamental shift in the fabric of reality around him. The swirling chaos of the neural nexus seemed to withdraw, pulling back like a tide receding from shore. Kalen felt himself being pushed away from the focal point, back toward the distant speck that was the perihelion. His vision darkened as the suit's life support failed, and his last conscious thought was a mixture of triumph and doubt. Had he succeeded, or had Zeracon simply found him too insignificant to bother destroying personally? Consciousness returned slowly, painfully. Kalen became aware first of the soft hum of medical equipment, then the sterile smell of the perihelion's small infirmary. When he finally managed to open his eyes, he found Anya sitting beside his bed, her face showing signs of exhaustion and relief. "Welcome back," she said softly. "For a while, we weren't sure you would make it." Kalen tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Anya helped him sip water through a straw, the simple act requiring more energy than he would have thought possible. "Zeracon?" he finally managed to croak. "Still there," she answered. "But different. It stopped its advance toward Earth's sector. The destructive patterns have ceased, at least temporarily." "How long?" "You've been unconscious for 3 days. We're already back in Earth-controlled space." Kalen tried to process this information. Did it work? Did I convince it? "We don't know for certain," Anya admitted. "But something happened out there. The neural nexus collapsed shortly after Jiray V12 retrieved you, and Zeracon's energy signature changed in ways our sensors can't fully analyze." The door slid open, and Holt entered, followed by Gray V12. The soldier's perpetual scowl had softened slightly, while the synthetic's movements seemed somehow more fluid, more natural. "The kid's awake," Holt observed unnecessarily. "Good. I was getting tired of watching Anya mope around your bedside." "What Darren means," Anya translated with a slight smile, "is that we're all relieved to see you recovering. My analysis indicates you experienced approximately 342% the lethal radiation dose for an unmodified human." GRAV-12 stated, "Your enhanced physiology appears to have remarkable regenerative capabilities." "I don't feel remarkable." Kalen groaned, attempting to sit up and immediately regretting it. "I feel like I've been taken apart and put back together wrong." "Not far from the truth," Holt said. "The doctors at Eden 4 are waiting to poke and prod you the moment we dock." "You're even more of a scientific curiosity now than when we left." "Great," Kalen muttered. "More tests." "Not just tests," Anya corrected. "The Council is hailing you as the one who made the Predator pause. You've become a symbol of hope for all humanity." Kalen closed his eyes, feeling the weight of that responsibility. "I didn't convince it to leave us alone forever. I just confused it, made it uncertain. Sometimes uncertainty is the beginning of change." G-Ray V12 observed, "For both predator and prey." "So what happens now?" Kalen asked, opening his eyes again to look at his unlikely companions, the diplomatic traitor, the bitter soldier, and the ancient war machine who had, against all odds, become something like friends. "Now," Anya said, "we prepare. Zeracon has withdrawn temporarily, but the galaxy now knows that Earth still exists. We can no longer hide in the shadows of our past mistakes. We need to rebuild," Holt added, "not just weapons, but connections, alliances. And we need to change," Kalen said quietly. "Become something more than what we were, something worthy of survival. I calculate a 57.8% probability that humanity will rise to this challenge. G-Ray V12 offered, which from the synthetic was practically a ringing endorsement. As the perihelion approached Eden 4, Kalen stood once more at the viewport, gazing out at the stars. Somewhere out there. Zarikon waited. Neither friend nor enemy, but something altogether more complex, a cosmic force that had, for the first time in its existence, encountered something it couldn't immediately categorize, a question instead of an answer, a possibility instead of a certainty. And in that small space of doubt, humanity had found room to breathe, to live, to hope. Kalen touched the implant behind his ear, the mark of his difference, the sign of humanity's attempt to evolve beyond its violent past. For the first time in his life, he felt not like an experiment or a symbol, but like a bridge between what humans had been and what they might become. The path ahead would not be easy. Earth would need to emerge from hiding, face the consequences of its past actions, and build a new place for itself in a galaxy that had nearly forgotten its existence. But they had been given a chance, perhaps their last one. "What are you thinking about?" Enya asked, joining him at the viewport. Kalen watched as Eden 4 grew larger in the distance, a tiny haven of light in the vast darkness of space. "I'm thinking about what I felt from Zarikon at the end," he replied. "Not anger or hunger or even indifference. Just curiosity." "Is that enough?" she'd wondered. "It has to be," Kalen said, as the lights of home welcomed them back. "For now, it has to be enough."